In today's society, we have so many competing beliefs, so many different value systems that us as individuals are operating on. So when you go to therapy, it can be kind of frightening to think, what if my therapist has a different value system than me? What if they believe differently, politically, sexually, religiously, or in some other way? Are they going to report me because I recreationally used weed for a second or something? It can be scary. Well, I want to talk about this, how it shows up in the therapy room and how I, as a therapist, believe it should be done, and how I've navigated these kinds of things. So at the end of my time with a client, we can both look at each other and say, that therapy was a really great experience. To make sure it is an awesome experience for both of us, I have a few things that I reference when I'm working with clients. The first thing is I listen very carefully. What are the client's goals when it comes to, let's use relationships for an example. Let's say I'm working with a young adult client and my value system is abstinence until marriage, and their value system is that they just would like to date a few people and really try to get to know them, and they are comfortable with sleeping with this person after a few dates. Okay, so how would I handle that as a therapist? One of the things I do, like I said, is I really try to listen. I will ask them without trying to make it about me. I don't even bring up, oh, well, my value system is this. But I say, tell me what your values are around when you feel like it's the right time to be sexual with somebody. Tell me what that looks like to you. And they might tell me something like, well, I don't like to jump right to it. I do like to get to know the person. And there's some other things I need to make sure that we're in a, somewhat of a committed relationship, or I feel like I need to know their family first and I want to know that they're really going to be there for me. And I might ask them, okay, great. What does that look like to know that they're going to be there for you? So that gets them talking and thinking. And I might cite some research that longer term happiness is definitely connected on knowing and trusting the person that you're sexual with, and knowing and trusting them more than you are sexual with them. And so having sexuality be a smaller part, whereas the knowing and trusting being a larger part. So asking them to consider that. So as an example, using sexuality, how I would manage that difference in values is just asking them questions to help them clarify their own values and to consider how that might work for their future self. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the future self. This is a really good reference for if there are other, again, value system differences. Let's say I'm a religious person and my client is not a religious person. And we're talking about maybe their difficulty in connecting with God, or their anger at him, or their decision that maybe he doesn't exist, something like that, because these things come up in therapy. Do I make that about myself? Do I turn to the Bible and start, reading the Bible to them? Nope, I most certainly do not. I don't make it about myself at all. What I do is I ask them questions that are curious and that are open. I might ask them something like, well, okay, where would you like to go with this place that you're at with God? Do you want to explore it more? Do you want to kind of put it on the shelf for now? And listen to them. And then I might ask, how about people that you admire in your family or your friend group? How are they connecting with God or their spiritual side? And then I listen. And I might ask something like, what would you like to try? Are there things that you are thinking about involving yourself to explore this side of yourself? And then I listen. And as I listen, there are little openings where I might say, oh, okay, does that something you want to look into more? Or do you want to talk about that more? But what I try very hard to do is not insert that I think it should look a certain way, but rather be very, very aware that everyone has a path, everyone has a journey, and that trusting the process of growth is the right way to look at things. That this person is going to end up wherever is right for them, and I do not need to control it. I don't need to impose what I have found to be a safe and happy place for myself when it comes to something like sexuality or religion. Again, politics, substance abuse, those are other really big topics. So let's talk about substance abuse. Sometimes I'll have clients who are afraid to mention that they have tried mushrooms, or maybe they smoke weed recreationally or something like that. Most people are pretty straightforward. They know that in therapy it's confidential. But sometimes I'll have a client that's like, are you going to turn me in? Are you going to say something? And obviously, I'm not talking like hardcore drug dealers, something like that. No, like that's not. I don't work with those populations. If it's something that is deeply illegal, we're going to have conversations about that. But something like small that they're experimenting or not sure or just tried something on a weekend or whatever. It is not my job to give them a lecture about anything, but just to say, how did you feel? What did you like? What didn't you like? What are you proud of? What are you ashamed of? If anything, how do you feel like, what do you want to talk to me about this? What are your thoughts? Where do you want to go with this? And usually they go right where they want to go. Like, gosh, I don't know. It really made me think and reflect about myself. And I'm not sure I like aspects of this, but I kind of like other aspects. And I just listen. And I don't listen in a way that's like super approving, like, oh, keep doing mushrooms by all means. Or that's super disapproving, like, how dare you do mushrooms? It's more like, what are you getting out of it? And what are you learning? I'm interested to know what you're learning. And there may be times, that it would be appropriate to very gently, just quietly at the edge say, yeah, I don't know that you're going to end up sticking with that. I don't know that that's going to be where you're going to go or end up, but I do believe you're on stepping stones to trying to figure yourself out. So to be very validating with wherever they are on their journey and helping them to see that I see that different steps of a journey are valid if you're awake to what you're doing and you're trying to grow. Another kind of anchor that I like to bring up is the impact on others. So if we are looking at differences in value system, let's use the example of politics. Let's say I have a young adult client that is very liberal and their parents are very conservative. I really don't ever bring up what I believe because I feel like it doesn't matter at all. It is completely irrelevant in therapy. So what we would look at if we're talking about, let's say, the relationship of this young adult to their parents and politics is an issue. What I would really focus on is the impact that this client might be having on others and that others are having on them and how they can negotiate having a better impact on their family or that the relationship can feel better. So if they're saying, gosh, we always get in these arguments at Sunday dinner about politics, I'm not going to say, well, what are your politics? Well, it sounds like your parents are right, or that you're right, or then your parents are toxic, or that you're toxic. We don't make it about that because can you see how messed up that would be? That would be really kind of like, I would call that very bad therapy. So what you would look at is, hey, it's fine that you and your parents see differently. First of all, it's normal at different stages of life to have different angles on politics. That's just normal development and it's okay. And you're entitled to have your feelings and thoughts, and they are too, and it doesn't make anybody toxic. This is all right. But what we do want to be aware of is how we're communicating our beliefs to, let's say, your parents, so that you're, like, what kind of impact do you want to have on your parents? Where do you want this to go? What do you want those interactions to look like? Do you want to alienate them? Do you want to have a positive relationship? Where do you want to go? And then we would navigate from there. If they would like a good relationship with their parents, then we'd talk about how do you angle your differences in politics to have a good relationship. It might look like maybe you don't talk about it a lot, or that you just use respectful words when you do talk about it. But again, just going back to how do you navigate these values in therapy, I never make it about myself. I make it about the client and their values, but try to frame that in what do you want your impact on others to look like? And as I may have mentioned earlier, another good frame is how do you want your future self to experience what you're doing now? I actually don't think I mentioned that yet, so let's talk about that. Again, if we're looking at some kind of value difference between me and the client, I don't make it about me, I make it about their value system. Let's use the example of grades in school. So I myself, as a high schooler and a college student, had my own particular views on grades, teachers, managing all this school stuff, right? And my client has their values. Maybe they're more strict, maybe they're more loose than I was, but my way is not the only way. So I'm going to use the question of your future self. What would your future self want you to do here in this situation. So say they're really struggling on whether to really burn the midnight oil and get that perfect 4.0 and maybe drive themselves to the edge of madness, or whether they should loosen up and relax on the grades. There's no right or wrong about this. Unless somebody's suicidal, then we get really clear that we have to lower stress. But let's say they're not there, it's just a choice. Then we have the conversation about there are many different things that make a good outcome around grades. One of them might be a good grade. Another one might be better physical or mental health if you pulled back on the grades. No one can give you these answers, but what would yourself a year from now, or 2 weeks from now, or a month from now think is better for you right now? So then asking them to reflect on what's the bigger hole in their life. Is it going to cause them more problem or give them more reward by increasing the grades, or by working maybe on their physical or mental health and pulling back on the grades? What's their future self going to feel that they made the wiser choice doing? And so using that future self as the judge for their value system, using their impact on other people as the judge for their value system, that points them inward to reflect critically on their own trajectory with their values and takes the focus off of what their therapist values system are. All right, I hope this is helpful to think about how you can manage differences in values within therapy. If you are struggling with a therapist where you feel like there's a difference in value system, please bring it up and talk to them, and it may expose if there really is a problem or not. I had a teenage client just a few weeks ago bring up that she felt she couldn't work with me anymore because I was Christian. And I asked her, well, why is that? And she said, well, it's just because I'm not Christian. And I said, have I ever imposed my values on you? And she says, well, no. And I said, when we've talked about religion, who brought it up? She said, well, me. And I said, that's right. You brought it up. And we talked about what you wanted to talk about with that. And she's like, yeah, that's a really good point. So it is sometimes possible that a client can judge the therapist as not being able to work with them because they have a prejudice against the therapist as well. So we talked about that, and the client's great, and she got it. She's like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's just that I was scared that maybe you would push something on me. And I said, but have I? And she's like, no. So I would encourage you to bring it up if you do feel like it's a concern. But if you do feel like you are being pushed in one direction or another, then that is, it can be a concern. So leave in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts of your own, and I hope this has been helpful to you, and have a wonderful day.